This is the story of Sarah Morrison, a woman whose husband dismissed her as a stagnant housewife and demanded a divorce on her 40th birthday. Little did he know, Sarah had spent years secretly building the very business empire that controlled his entire career. It is a tale of silent power and the ultimate revelation that the person he underestimated was actually the one holding his world together. The candles were the first thing Sarah lit. She had chosen them carefully. Soy wax, infused with bergamot and wild jasmine, the same scent she had worn on her wedding day 15 years ago. She placed them along the center of the dining table, their small flames flickering in the early evening dimness, casting soft, dancing shadows across the white linen tablecloth. The good china was set. The crystal wine glasses, a wedding gift from her mother, stood waiting. And in the center of the table, on a porcelain cake stand, sat the cake she had spent the afternoon baking. 3 layers of vanilla sponge with honey rosemary buttercream, decorated with sugared violets, and a single elegant 40 in gold leaf. She was 40 years old today. Sarah stepped back from the table and surveyed her work. The dining room was warm and golden, the candles reflecting in the dark window panes, the faint strains of a jazz playlist drifting from the speakers in the living room. Everything was perfect, quiet, intimate, the kind of celebration she had always preferred. Not the loud, performative parties that David seemed to thrive on, but something real, something that felt like them, or what she had believed was them. She smoothed the front of her dress, a deep sapphire silk that skimmed her hips and made her dark hair look almost luminous. She had bought it specifically for tonight, wanting to feel beautiful, wanting David to see her the way he used to see her, the way he had looked at her on their wedding day, his eyes full of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she had chosen him. She had chosen him again and again for 15 years, through the lean years when they lived in a cramped apartment and ate pasta 4 nights a week, through the stressful years when David was climbing the corporate ladder at Apex Stream, working late nights and weekends, leaving Sarah to manage the house and the bills and the quiet, growing loneliness of a marriage that was beginning to feel one-sided. Through all of it, she had chosen him. She had believed he had chosen her too. The front door opened. Sarah's heart lifted, a small, involuntary flutter of hope that she immediately tried to suppress. She had learned over the past few years not to expect too much from David's arrivals. He came home late more often than not. His tie loosened, his eyes on his phone, his mind still half occupied with whatever deal or crisis had consumed his day. Tonight was different. Tonight was her birthday. Surely, tonight he would be present. "David," she called, stepping into the hallway. "I'm in the dining room. I made dinner and cake. I thought we could—" She stopped. David was standing in the foyer, but he hadn't taken off his coat. He hadn't set down his briefcase. He was just standing there, his phone in one hand, his eyes fixed on the screen with an intensity that made Sarah's stomach tighten. He looked up when she spoke, and his expression, his eyes, cold and distant, utterly without warmth, told her everything she needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "We need to talk," he said. 3 words, 3 small, ordinary words that somehow managed to shatter the careful peace of the evening like a stone through glass. Sarah's hands, which had been resting at her sides, curled into loose fists. "Talk about what?" "David, it's my birthday. I made dinner, the cake." "I know." His voice was flat. "I'm sorry. This can't wait." He walked past her into the living room, still wearing his coat, still holding his phone. He didn't look at the dining room. He didn't glance at the candles, the china, the cake she had spent hours baking. He simply sat down on the edge of the sofa they had picked out together years ago when they were still building this life, and set his phone on the coffee table. Sarah followed him slowly. Her legs felt strange, disconnected from her body, as if she were moving through water. She stopped in the doorway and looked at him, at the man she had married, the man she had loved, the man who was now looking at her as if she were a problem to be solved. "David," she said, "you're scaring me." He let out a breath. It was a short, impatient sound, the exhale of a man who had been waiting for this moment and was relieved it had finally arrived. "Sarah, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time. I've tried to make it work, but I can't anymore. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, absolute and irrevocable. Sarah stared at him. The candles flickered in the next room, their soft glow spilling through the doorway, illuminating the edge of David's face. He looked handsome, still. He had aged well, his jaw still sharp, his hair still thick, though silver, now threaded through the dark. He looked like a man who belonged on the cover of a business magazine, confident and successful. He looked like the man she had fallen in love with, but his eyes were a stranger's. "A divorce," Sarah repeated. Her voice was quiet, steady. She didn't know where the steadiness was coming from. Inside, she felt like a building that had just been detonated, the structure still standing, but hollowed out, ready to collapse. "On my 40th birthday. You're asking for a divorce on my 40th birthday." David's jaw tightened. "I didn't plan it this way, but you deserve the truth, Sarah. I've met someone who matches my energy, someone who makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. Someone who matches my energy." The phrase was so rehearsed, so perfectly calibrated, that Sarah knew he had practiced it. He had probably practiced it in front of a mirror, or in the car on his way home, or in the company of the woman he was about to name. "Who?" Sarah asked. David hesitated. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of guilt or shame, or perhaps just the awareness that he was about to say something that would change everything. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold, defensive certainty. "Her name is Mia. She's 24. She's a fitness influencer. You might have seen her on Instagram." He said it as if it were a credential, as if fitness influencer was a title that commanded respect. "She's vibrant, Sarah. She's full of life. She doesn't let herself get bogged down in the small stuff. She's the kind of woman who matches the man I've become." The man I've become. Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not grief. Not yet. The grief would come later, in the small hours of the night, when the shock wore off and the full weight of the betrayal settled into her bones. What she felt now was something colder, something sharper, a quiet, crystalline fury that was only beginning to wake. "The man you've become," she repeated. "And what man is that, David?" He straightened, his shoulders squaring. He looked, in that moment, exactly like the photographs he posted on LinkedIn. The ones where he stood in front of the Apex Stream logo, his arms crossed, his smile confident and just slightly condescending. The ones Sarah had always liked without comment, because she knew how much they mattered to him. "I've become a high-powered executive, Sarah, senior VP of operations at a Fortune 1000 company. I have a reputation, I have a brand, I have a certain image to maintain, and I need a woman who looks the part, someone who can walk into a room on my arm and command attention, someone who understands the lifestyle I've earned." He looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes sweeping over her sapphire dress, her dark hair, her quiet, unadorned beauty, and something in his expression curdled into contempt. "You're a wonderful person, Sarah. You've been a good wife, but you're stagnant. You stay home. You consult on your computer. You bake cakes and tend your garden and live this small, quiet life. That was fine when we were young. It was fine when I was still climbing, but I'm at the top now, and I need more." Stagnant. The word hit her like a slap. She had spent 15 years building a life around this man. She had supported his career, managed his household, listened to his complaints and his dreams, and his endless, exhausting self-importance. She had done all of it while building something of her own, something he had never bothered to notice because he had never bothered to ask, and he was calling her stagnant. Sarah looked at him, at the man who had just told her on her 40th birthday that she was no longer good enough for him, at the man who was leaving her for a 24-year-old fitness influencer who probably couldn't spell executive, at the man who had no idea that the company he worked for, the company whose logo he posed in front of, whose paycheck he cashed every 2 weeks, was owned by the woman he had just dismissed as stagnant. She didn't tell him. She could have. She could have watched his face crumple as she explained that Horizon Group, the massive conglomerate that had acquired Apex Stream 3 years ago, was hers, that she had built it from a small inheritance. Late at night, while he slept, that every promotion he had received, every bonus he had bragged about, every dollar he had spent on his lifestyle had come from her. She could have destroyed him with a single sentence, but she didn't, because she needed to think, she needed to plan, she needed to decide exactly how she wanted to handle the man who had just thrown away 15 years of marriage for a woman who probably thought a 401k was a yoga pose. "You've made yourself very clear," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, quiet, the voice of a woman who had already begun to detach, to retreat to some safer, more distant part of herself. "Is there anything else?" David blinked. He had clearly expected tears, recriminations, perhaps even begging. The absence of all three seemed to unsettle him. No, that's it. I'll have my lawyers send over the paperwork. I'm willing to be generous, Sarah. You can keep the house. I'll take the liquidity, the investments, the penthouse we were looking at. It's only fair. I earned it." "I earned it?" Sarah smiled. It was a small, cold smile, the smile of a woman who knew something he didn't. "Of course, David. You earned it." He stood up, adjusting his coat. He looked at her for a long moment, and something flickered in his eyes. A ghost of the man she had married, the man who had once looked at her with wonder. Then it was gone. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am. I hope you find someone who appreciates you, someone who matches your energy." He walked out of the living room. The front door opened and closed. The sound of his car engine starting up and pulling away faded into the evening quiet. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long time. The candles in the dining room continued to flicker, their flames reflected in the dark window panes. The cake sat untouched on its porcelain stand, the gold 40 catching the soft light. She walked to the table and looked at it. The cake she had baked for herself, because David had forgotten to order one. The dinner she had prepared, because David had been too busy to make a reservation. The celebration she had planned, because she had wanted to believe that her marriage was still something worth celebrating. She reached out and picked up the cake knife. She cut a single slice, neat, precise, the way she did everything, and set it on a plate. She poured herself a glass of wine from the bottle she had been saving for a special occasion. Then she sat down at the table, alone, and ate her birthday cake. It was delicious. The honey rosemary buttercream was perfectly balanced, the vanilla sponge light and tender. She had outdone herself. When she finished, she set down her fork and looked at her phone. There was a text from David, sent from his car. "I'm staying at the Grandison tonight. I'll come by tomorrow for my things. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." She deleted it. Then she opened a different app, a secure messaging platform she used for business communications. She typed a single message to the contact saved as A. Sterling. "The Eagle has landed. Execute Project Horizon. Full disclosure of beneficial ownership to the board by end of week. And Anya, make sure David Morrison is present when it happens." The reply came back in under a minute. "With pleasure, Madam Chair. Happy birthday." Sarah set down her phone. She picked up her wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine was excellent, a 2012 Dom Perignon, the same vintage she and David had drunk on their wedding night. She had been saving it for a moment that mattered. This moment mattered. David thought he was leaving a stagnant housewife for a younger model. He thought he was trading up. He thought the life he had built, the job, the money, the penthouse, the prestige, was his own creation, earned through his own brilliance and ambition. He was wrong. He had no idea that the paycheck he cashed every 2 weeks was signed by the woman he had just discarded. He had no idea that the company he worked for was a subsidiary of a conglomerate owned, in its entirety, by the wife he had called stagnant. He had no idea that the consulting he had dismissed was the quiet, steady work of building an empire. But he would learn. Sarah finished her wine. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. Somewhere across the city, David was probably checking into his hotel room, texting Mia, congratulating himself on his clean escape. Let him. Let him enjoy his last few days of believing he was the one in control. The reckoning was coming, and Sarah, founder of Horizon Group, majority shareholder of Apex Stream, and the woman who had just been told she wasn't high-powered enough, was going to deliver it herself. She turned from the window and walked to her small home office, the alcove off the hallway, where David had always assumed she was playing solitaire. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and began to work. Candles in the dining room burned down to nothing. The cake sat on its stand, one slice missing, and Sarah Morrison, on the night of her 40th birthday, began to dismantle her husband's life with the same quiet, methodical precision she had used to build her own. The papers arrived 3 days after her birthday. Sarah was in the garden when the courier pulled up to the curb. A young man on a bicycle, his messenger bag slung across his chest, his face flushed from the early autumn chill. She had been kneeling in the flower bed, her hands buried in the cool, dark soil, planting the last of the fall bulbs, tulips, deep purple, almost black, with petals that would unfurl in the spring like small, secret triumphs. She had always loved the garden. It was her mother's legacy, passed down through years of patient teaching, how to amend the soil, how to space the bulbs, how to trust that the cold, dormant months would eventually give way to something beautiful. David had never understood it. He had called it her little hobby, his voice tinged with the faint condescension of a man who measured value only in dollars and promotions. He didn't see the point of digging in the dirt when you could pay someone else to do it. Sarah saw the point. The garden was hers. It asked nothing of her but patience and care, and it gave back everything in return. She brushed the soil from her hands and walked to the front gate. The courier handed her a thick manila envelope, return address embossed in crisp black ink, Morrison and Associates, Family Law. She signed the electronic pad, thanked the young man, and carried the envelope inside. She didn't open it immediately. She made a cup of tea first, chamomile, from the tin her mother had given her years ago, and sat at the kitchen table, the envelope before her, the autumn light falling soft and golden through the window. She took a sip of tea. She looked at her name on the envelope, Sarah Morrison, respondent. Respondent, as if this were something being done to her, rather than something David had chosen. She opened the envelope. The settlement offer was 23 pages long. Sarah read it slowly, her tea growing cold beside her, her face betraying nothing. Page by page, she absorbed the precise legal language that translated David's betrayal into a series of financial transactions. The house, their modest 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street, was hers. He was generously allowing her to keep it. The mortgage was nearly paid off. She would only need to cover the remaining balance and the property taxes. The rest was his. The luxury SUV, the black Range Rover he had leased 18 months ago, after his last promotion, was to be retained by him. The country club membership, with its golf privileges and its networking opportunities and its endless, exhausting social performances, was his. The investment accounts, the savings, the liquidity he had referenced on her birthday, all of it was to be divided, with the majority falling to him. He was the primary earner, after all. He had built their lifestyle. It was only fair. There was a section about spousal support. David, through his lawyers, had argued that Sarah was capable of self-support, and that any award of alimony would be inequitable given the brevity of the marriage's high-earning period. Brevity of the high-earning period. As if the 15 years she had spent supporting his career, the late nights she had spent alone, the dinners she had eaten cold, the promotions she had celebrated with him while her own ambitions gathered dust, counted for nothing. Sarah read the section twice, then she set it down and laughed. It was a small laugh, quiet and sharp, the laugh of a woman who had just been handed a gift she hadn't known she was waiting for. David thought he was being generous. He thought he was walking away with the lion's share of a life they had built together. He thought the house on Maple Street was a consolation prize, a bone thrown to the stagnant wife who had failed to keep up with his meteoric rise. He had no idea. David came to the house that evening to discuss the terms. He arrived in the Range Rover, its black exterior gleaming under the streetlights, its engine purring with the quiet arrogance of a machine that knew its own worth. He was wearing a new suit, charcoal gray, European cut, tailored to fit him like a second skin. His hair was freshly trimmed. His shoes were Italian leather. He looked like a man who had already moved on, who was merely stopping by his old life to collect the last few items before driving away into his new one. Sarah watched him through the front window. She was wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry except her mother's pearl studs. She looked exactly like what David believed her to be, a modest, unremarkable woman, still rooted in the life he was leaving behind. She opened the door before he could knock. "David, Sarah!" He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the foyer with the quick, assessing glance of a man cataloging assets. "You got the papers." "I did." She closed the door behind him and walked into the living room. She didn't offer him coffee. She didn't offer him a seat. She simply stood by the window, her arms crossed, and waited. David followed her, his posture easy, confident. He sat down on the sofa, their sofa, the one they had picked out together, and crossed his legs, his ankle resting on his knee. He looked like he belonged there. He looked like he had always belonged there, but he didn't, not anymore. "I wanted to go over a few things," he said, pulling a folded copy of the settlement from his jacket pocket. "Make sure we're on the same page. I know this is hard, Sarah. I know it's a lot to process, but I think you'll see that I'm being more than fair." Fair. The words sat in the air between them, heavy and wrong. Sarah said nothing. She just looked at him, her face calm, her eyes steady. David shifted slightly, unsettled by her silence. He had expected tears. He had expected anger. He had expected the messy, emotional fallout that he had always been so bad at handling. Sarah's quiet composure was throwing him off. "The house," he said, tapping the paper. "You keep it, free and clear, aside from the remaining mortgage balance. It's a good house, Sarah. Solid. You'll be comfortable here." "Generous of you," Sarah said. Her voice was flat. David missed the irony. "It is. Most men in my position would fight for every asset. I'm not trying to hurt you, Sarah. I just need to move forward with my life. Mia and I, we have plans. The penthouse, the club, the lifestyle, it's part of who I am now. You understand that? Part of who I am now." As if his identity were a suit he could change, discarding the old one when it no longer fit. "And the SUV," Sarah said. "The club membership, the investments, all of it. You earned it." David's face brightened. "Exactly. I've worked hard to climb the corporate ladder at Apex, Sarah. It's my sweat and tears that built our lifestyle. I'm not trying to diminish what you contributed. You kept the house running. You did your little consulting projects. But the heavy lifting? That was me. The late nights, the negotiations, the pressure. I carried all of that. Your little consulting projects." Sarah felt the words land like stones in her chest. Not because they hurt. She was past the point where David's words could hurt her, but because of the sheer, breathtaking ignorance they revealed. He had no idea. After 15 years of marriage, he had no idea what she had been doing in the alcove off the hallway. He had never asked. He had never wondered. He had simply assumed that her work was small, unimportant, the hobby of a woman who had failed to keep up. She smiled. It was a small, private smile. The smile of a woman who knew something he didn't. "I'm sure I'll find a nice little job to keep myself busy," she said, echoing the words she knew he was thinking. "Something modest, something that fits my energy." David nodded, relieved. "That's the spirit. You're a capable woman, Sarah. You'll land on your feet. And honestly, this is an opportunity for you too. A chance to figure out who you are outside of this marriage. I really do wish you the best." He stood up, smoothing his jacket. He looked around the living room, at the bookshelves Sarah had built herself, at the photographs of their life together that still hung on the walls, at the quiet, comfortable home she had made, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of doubt. A whisper of loss. Then it was gone. "The papers need your signature," he said, pulling a pen from his inside pocket. A Mont Blanc, Sarah noticed. New, expensive, probably a gift from Mia or a gift to himself, celebrating his freedom. "Once you sign, we can file and move forward. I'd like this to be as quick and clean as possible." He held out the pen. Sarah looked at it, at the man holding it, at the life he was so eager to leave behind. She reached out and took the pen. She signed the papers with a steady hand, page after page, her signature flowing across the lines. Sarah Morrison, each stroke a quiet, deliberate act of release. She didn't read the fine print. She didn't need to. The terms of this settlement didn't matter. The house, the SUV, the country club membership, none of it mattered. What mattered was what David didn't know. what he had never bothered to learn. When she finished, she set down the pen and slid the papers across the coffee table toward him. "It's done," she said. David picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the signature lines. He looked satisfied, relieved. He folded the document and tucked it back into his jacket pocket, then stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "Thank you, Sarah, for making this easy. I know it's not what you wanted, but I really do think it's for the best, for both of us." Sarah stood too. She walked him to the door, her steps slow and measured, her heart beating a quiet, steady rhythm. At the threshold, he paused and turned back. "You know," he said, his voice softening into something that might have been genuine, "I did love you, once. I hope you believe that." Sarah looked at him, at the man she had married, the man she had loved. The man who was now walking away with a settlement he believed was generous and a future he believed was his. "I know," she said. "Goodbye, David." He nodded, then turned and walked to the Range Rover. The engine started with a low, confident growl. The headlights swept across the front of the house, illuminating the garden where Sarah had planted her tulip bulbs, the ones that would bloom in the spring, deep purple and beautiful, a secret triumph waiting beneath the soil. She watched him drive away. She stood in the doorway until the tail lights disappeared around the corner, until the sound of the engine faded into the evening quiet, until she was alone with the house and the garden and the life he had discarded. Then she closed the door. She walked back to the kitchen and picked up her cold cup of tea. She didn't drink it. She just held it, her hands wrapped around the ceramic, feeling its solid, familiar weight. David thought he had won. He thought he had walked away with the best parts of their life, leaving her with the scraps. He thought the little consulting projects she had done in the alcove were the full measure of her ambition. He was wrong. Sarah set down the teacup and walked to the alcove, the small, quiet space off the hallway where David had always assumed she was playing solitaire. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. The screen glowed to life, displaying the Horizon Group dashboard, a real-time feed of revenue streams, subsidiary performance metrics, and executive payroll authorizations. Apex Delivery, David's company, was a single tile on that dashboard, a medium-sized one, not even the largest. Sarah clicked on the tile. A drop-down menu appeared, listing every employee, every salary, every bonus structure. She scrolled down until she found his name, David Morrison, Senior VP of Operations. Beside his name was a small icon, a gear, indicating administrative controls. She clicked it. A new screen opened, Executive Payroll Authorization. Sarah had designed this system herself, late at night, while David slept. She had built it with the same patient, methodical care she brought to her garden, amending the code, spacing the features, trusting that the quiet, dormant months of work would eventually give way to something powerful. She hovered her cursor over David's name. A single click would freeze his salary. Another would revoke his bonus eligibility. A third would flag his employment status for executive review. She didn't click, not yet. She was still planning, still waiting for the right moment. But soon, she closed the laptop and sat back in her chair. The house was quiet around her, the same quiet she had known for 15 years. The quiet of a woman who had learned to build an empire in the spaces her husband never thought to look. David had called her stagnant. He had dismissed her work as little consulting projects. He had walked away with the SUV and the club membership and the belief that he was the architect of his own success. He would learn the truth soon enough, and Sarah would be there when he did. She stood up and walked to the window. The garden was dark now, the flower beds hidden beneath the autumn leaves. But beneath the soil, the tulip bulbs were sleeping, waiting for the spring. They would bloom, deep purple, almost black, a secret triumph rising from the cold earth, just like her. The truth about Sarah Morrison began not in a boardroom, but in a hospital waiting room. It was 7 years ago, 3 weeks after her mother's funeral. Sarah had been sitting in the worn plastic chair outside the ICU, her father's hand limp in hers, the monitors beeping their steady, terrible rhythm. Her father had collapsed 2 days after the burial, A heart attack, the doctor said, brought on by the stress of losing his wife of 41 years. He would survive, but he would never be the same. Neither would Sarah. It was in that waiting room, surrounded by the antiseptic smell of grief and the low murmur of other families holding their own vigils, that Sarah had received the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope forwarded from her parents' house, the return address belonging to a law firm she had never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a check. The paper was a letter from her mother, written in the shaky hand of a woman who knew she was running out of time. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I am gone. I hope you are not reading it too soon. I hope you had many more years of my nagging and my terrible cooking and my insistence that you wear a scarf when it's cold. But if you are reading it, know this. I loved you more than I ever found the words to say. Your father and I were never wealthy. We lived simply, and we were happy. But your grandmother, my mother, was a different kind of woman. She came from nothing and built something. She invested every spare dollar she earned, quietly, patiently, over decades. She left it all to me, with instructions to pass it to you when the time was right. The time is right. There is a sum of money attached to this letter. It is more than you expect. It is more than I ever expected. Your grandmother believed that women should have their own resources, their own power, their own futures that did not depend on the whims of men. She believed in you, Sarah, even though she only knew you as a child. I believe in you, too. Use this to build something that is yours, not David's, yours, something that no one can take from you. Something that would make your grandmother proud. I love you. I am proud of you. And I will be watching. Mom, the check was for $2.7 million. Sarah had stared at it for a long time. The waiting room hummed around her. The monitors beeped. Her father slept. And Sarah, the quiet housewife who consulted on her computer, who baked cakes and tended her garden and supported her husband's career with patient, invisible labor, held the means to build an empire in her trembling hands. She didn't tell David. It wasn't a decision she made consciously, not at first. She simply folded the letter and the check into her purse and drove home, her mind spinning with possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. David was at work, a late night, some crisis with a client, and the house was empty. She walked into the alcove off the hallway, the small space where she did her consulting, and sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. She started to research. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and secret phone calls. Sarah told David she was taking on more consulting projects, a lie he accepted without question because he had never been interested in the details of her work. She opened a business account under a name he wouldn't recognize, Vanguard Holdings, LLC. She hired a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Anya Sterling, who specialized in corporate structuring and had a particular passion for helping women protect their assets. She started to build. Her first investment was small, $300,000 in a logistics startup founded by a former truck driver named Elena Vasquez. Elena had developed a proprietary routing algorithm that reduced fuel costs by 18%, but she couldn't get a meeting with any of the major venture capital firms. She was a woman. She was Latina. She didn't have an MBA. The gatekeepers dismissed her before she could even make her pitch. Sarah didn't dismiss her. She met Elena in a diner off the interstate, both of them wearing jeans and drinking bad coffee, and she listened. She asked questions. She saw, in Elena's fierce, determined face, a reflection of something she recognized. She wrote the check. 18 months later, Elena's company was acquired by a national courier service for $4.2 million. Sarah's share was $1.8 million. She reinvested every penny, and Vanguard Holdings began to grow. The acquisition of Apex Delivery happened 3 years ago, almost by accident. Sarah hadn't set out to buy the company her husband worked for. She had been tracking Apex as a potential investment, a mid-sized logistics firm with solid infrastructure but struggling leadership, bleeding money due to outdated systems and a toxic culture. The CEO at the time was a man named Gerald Finch, a tired, uninspired leader who had been phoning it in for years. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy, quietly shopping for a buyer before the news went public and tanked their remaining value. Anya Sterling brought Sarah the file. "It's a mess," she said, sliding the folder across the table. "But the underlying assets are strong. With the right leadership and a capital infusion, it could be turned around. Question is whether you want to get involved with a company where your husband works." Sarah had considered this. David was a senior manager at the time, climbing the ladder with his usual combination of charm and bluster. He came home every night complaining about the idiots in leadership and the disaster of the company's direction. He had no idea that his wife was sitting across from a lawyer, deciding whether to buy the place. "If I acquire it," Sarah said slowly, "I can turn it around. I can save the jobs. I can build something sustainable. And David," she paused, "David needs to believe he earned his success. If he knew I owned the company, it would destroy him, or it would destroy us. I'm not sure which is worse." Anya had looked at her with something like pity. "You're protecting his ego at the expense of your own recognition." "I'm protecting my marriage," Sarah said. "What's left of it?" The acquisition went through quietly, through a series of shell companies and holding structures that obscured the true ownership. Vanguard Holdings acquired a controlling interest in Apex Delivery. Gerald Finch was retained as a figurehead CEO, given a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. The board was restructured with Vanguard appointees, all of whom reported ultimately to Sarah. And David, ambitious, oblivious David, was given a promotion. Sarah had arranged it herself. She had reviewed his performance metrics, such as they were, and determined that he was, at the very least, not actively harming the company. He was good at managing people when he bothered to pay attention. He was decent at client relations when he wasn't too busy complaining about them behind their backs. He was, in short, a perfectly adequate middle manager. She promoted him to Senior VP of Operations. The salary bump was substantial. The bonus structure was generous. David came home that night with a bottle of champagne and a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "They finally recognized my talent, Sarah," he said, popping the cork and pouring 2 glasses. "The new owners, whoever they are, they see what I bring to the table. This is just the beginning. I'm going to run this company someday." Sarah had smiled and clinked her glass against his. "I'm sure you will, David. You've earned it." She had signed the promotion papers herself, sitting in the alcove at 2 in the morning while David slept upstairs. She had authorized the salary increase, the bonus, the executive benefits package. She had done it because she loved him, or because she believed she loved him, which at the time felt like the same thing. And she had done it because she wanted to believe that he would see her eventually, that he would notice the woman behind the scenes, the one who made everything possible, that he would look at her the way he had looked at her on their wedding day, full of wonder and gratitude and love. He never did. The years that followed were a study in quiet contradictions. By day, Sarah was the invisible wife, the woman who kept the house running, who baked cakes and tended her garden, who nodded sympathetically while David complained about corporate bureaucracy and faceless owners who don't understand the business. She smiled at company picnics and made small talk with the other executives' wives, women who talked about Pilates and private schools and the burdens of managing household staff. She wore simple clothes. She drove a modest sedan. She was forgettable. By night, she was the sole owner of Vanguard Holdings, a venture capital firm with a diversified portfolio worth over $400 million. She made decisions that affected thousands of employees. She negotiated acquisitions, pivoted strategies, and mentored a new generation of entrepreneurs, women and people of color. and others who had been dismissed by the traditional gatekeepers. She built an empire in the dark, while the world believed she was nothing more than a housewife with a hobby. And David saw none of it. He saw the meals she prepared, but not the late nights she spent on conference calls with Tokyo and London. He saw the clean laundry, but not the quarterly reports she reviewed at the kitchen table while he watched golf. He saw the consulting she did in the alcove, but he never asked what she was actually doing. He never wondered where the extra money came from, the new roof, the updated appliances, the small but steady improvements to their life that he took for granted. He simply assumed. Sarah let him assume. She told herself it was love. She told herself she was protecting him, protecting their marriage, protecting the fragile peace they had built. But somewhere, in the quiet hours of the night, she began to understand the truth. She wasn't protecting him. She was hiding. She was hiding because she was afraid. Afraid that if David knew who she really was, what she had built, what she was worth, he would look at her differently. He would see dollar signs instead of a partner. He would resent her, or worse, he would try to take credit for her success. She had seen it happen to other women, women whose husbands felt threatened by their achievements, who belittled and undermined and eventually destroyed what they couldn't control. She had convinced herself that David was different, that he loved her for herself, not for what she could provide, that if she just kept quiet, kept small, kept invisible, he would eventually turn around and see her. She was wrong. The night of her 40th birthday, when David sat on their sofa and told her she was stagnant, that she wasn't high-powered enough for the man he had become, Sarah felt something shift inside her, not break, shift. Like a gear clicking into place, like a lock finally turning after years of being jammed. She had spent 7 years building an empire in the dark, 7 years protecting a man who had never protected her, 7 years shrinking herself so that he could feel big, and he had rewarded her by leaving, by calling her stagnant, by choosing a 24-year-old fitness influencer who probably couldn't spell executive, let alone understand the complex machinery of the company Sarah had built. The irony was so sharp, it cut. Sarah sat in the alcove on the night of her birthday, after David had driven away in his Range Rover, and looked at the Vanguard Holdings dashboard on her screen. Apex Delivery was there, a single tile among many. David's name was there too, listed under executive payroll, his salary, his bonus, his benefits, all of it authorized by her. She thought about the years she had spent protecting his ego, the promotions she had quietly approved, the raises she had signed, the way she had propped up his career while he dismissed hers as little consulting projects. She thought about the settlement he had offered her, the house, the scraps, the condescending assurance that she would find a nice little job. She thought about Mia, the 24-year-old fitness influencer, the woman David had chosen over 15 years of marriage, the woman who was probably, at this very moment, lying in the penthouse David had planned to buy with money he didn't know came from Sarah. Sarah reached out and closed the laptop. She didn't need to act tonight. She didn't need to freeze his salary or revoke his bonus or flag his employment for review. Those things would come in time. She would plan. She would prepare. She would choose the exact right moment to reveal the truth. And when she did, David Morrison would learn exactly who he had discarded. But not yet. Tonight, she would sleep. She would wake up tomorrow and tend her garden. She would plant the last of the fall bulbs, the deep purple tulips that would bloom in the spring, a secret triumph rising from the cold earth. And she would wait. 3 weeks after her birthday, Sarah received an email from Anya Sterling. The board meeting is scheduled for next Thursday. Gerald Finch is retiring as planned. The new CEO of Apex Delivery will be announced. I've taken the liberty of ensuring that David Morrison is on the attendee list. He believes he's being considered for the position. He's been telling everyone who will listen that the anonymous owner is coming to hand him the keys to the kingdom. Sarah read the email twice. Then she smiled. It was the same smile she had worn when she signed the settlement papers. The same smile she had worn when she cut a single slice of her birthday cake and ate it alone in the quiet of her dining room while the candles burned down to nothing. A small, cold, patient smile. He believes he's being considered for the position. Of course he did. David had spent his entire career believing that success was something he deserved, not something he earned. He had climbed the ladder at Apex Delivery, unaware that every rung had been placed there by the wife he dismissed as stagnant. He had bragged about his title, his salary, his high-powered executive lifestyle, never knowing that the woman who signed his paychecks was sleeping beside him every night. Now, he was about to learn the truth. Sarah typed her reply to Anya. "Make sure the boardroom is set up for a presentation. I want him to see me walk in. I want him to understand, in front of everyone, exactly who he threw away." And Anya? Yes? Have the termination paperwork ready, just in case. She hit send. Then she stood up and walked to the window. The garden was quiet in the gray autumn light, the flower beds dark and dormant, but beneath the soil the tulip bulbs were waiting. They would bloom in the spring, deep purple, almost black, a secret triumph that no one could take from her. Just like her empire, just like her. David thought he was leaving a stagnant housewife for a younger model. He thought he was trading up. He thought the life he had built, the job, the money, the prestige, was his own creation, earned through his own brilliance and ambition. He was about to learn the truth, and Sarah, founder of Vanguard Holdings, majority shareholder of Apex Delivery, and the woman who had just been told she wasn't high-powered enough, would be the one to teach him. The morning of the board meeting, David Morrison woke up feeling like a king. He had slept in the junior suite at the Grandison, the same hotel where he had been staying since leaving Sarah 3 weeks ago. The room was elegant but impersonal, a temporary perch for a man who believed he was about to ascend to something far grander. Mia lay beside him, her blonde hair fanned across the pillow, her phone already in her hand as she scrolled through her morning analytics. She was wearing a silk eye mask pushed up on her forehead and a satisfied smile. "Big day, babe," she murmured, not looking up from her screen. "You ready to be CEO?" David swung his legs out of bed and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath him, a grid of ambition and concrete. He could see the Apex Delivery Tower from here, a glass needle piercing the skyline, 38 stories of corporate dominance. His kingdom, soon to be officially his. "They're announcing it today," he said, his voice thick with certainty. "The anonymous chairperson is coming in person. Gerald Finch is retiring, and the board has been instructed to elevate internal talent. That's me, Mia. I'm the only internal talent worth elevating." Mia finally looked up from her phone. She had the eyes of a predator, beautiful, calculating, and utterly devoid of loyalty to anything but her own advancement. "And you're sure this chairperson isn't bringing in some outside guy? Some Harvard MBA with a stick up his—" "No." David turned from the window, his chest puffed with confidence. "I've made sure of it. I had lunch with Gerald last week. He as much as told me the job was mine. The chairperson wants to meet the leadership team, get a sense of the culture, and then make the announcement. It's a formality, a coronation." Mia smiled, a slow, feline curve of her lips. "I knew I picked a winner. What time should I be there?" 10 o'clock. The lobby. Wear something that photographs well. David walked to the closet and pulled out his suit, a Tom Ford three-piece in midnight blue that had cost him $6,000. He had bought it for this day. He had been planning for this day for years, even if he hadn't known exactly when it would come. "I want you there when I walk out of that boardroom. I want the world to see what success looks like." Mia laughed. "Success looks like a middle-aged man in an expensive suit with a hot young girlfriend." Got it. David didn't flinch at the description. He was 47 years old. He had earned the right to be with a woman who reflected his status. Sarah had been fine for the climbing years, steady, reliable, unremarkable, but he was at the top now. He needed someone who looked the part. He finished dressing and stood before the mirror. The suit fit him perfectly. His hair was trimmed, his jaw clean-shaven, his posture straight. He looked like a CEO. He looked like the man he had always known he was meant to be. He picked up his phone and sent a text to Sarah, not because he wanted to, because he wanted her to see what she had lost. Big day today. Apex is announcing the new CEO. I'll send you the press release. Hope you're doing well. He didn't wait for a reply. He pocketed his phone, kissed Mia on the forehead, and walked out of the hotel room. The elevator carried him down to the lobby, and the lobby carried him out into the city, and the city carried him toward the tower that he believed with every fiber of his being was about to become his. The Apex Delivery headquarters was a monument to corporate ambition. 38 stories of glass and steel, it rose above the downtown skyline like a declaration. The lobby was a cathedral of polished marble and indirect lighting, with a waterfall feature that cascaded down a wall of black stone and a reception desk that looked like it belonged in a five-star hotel. Employees moved through the space with the brisk, purposeful energy of people who believed they were part of something important. David walked through the revolving doors at 9:47 a.m. He didn't take the employee entrance. He walked through the main lobby, past the waterfall, past the security desk, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He was wearing his Tom Ford suit and his Italian leather shoes, and the expression of a man who already owned the place. The security guard, a retired cop named Frank, who had been with the company for 18 years, looked up as David approached. "Morning, Mr. Morrison," Frank said. His voice was neutral. "Frank," David didn't break stride. "Make sure the main auditorium is set up for 11. I'll be making a statement after the board meeting. And tell catering to have champagne ready. The good stuff, not the cheap sparkling wine they used at the last quarterly." Frank blinked. "Sir, I'm security. Catering is—" "Then tell someone who can handle it," David snapped, already walking toward the executive elevator bank. "I don't have time for the org chart this morning." He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 38th floor. The doors closed on Frank's expression, which had shifted from neutral to quietly mutinous. The elevator rose. David watched the numbers climb and felt the familiar rush of verticality. He had spent 15 years climbing this building, floor by floor, meeting by meeting. He had started as a regional manager on the 12th floor, back when Apex Delivery was just a struggling logistics firm with outdated systems and mediocre leadership. He had clawed his way up, over the backs of colleagues, through the wreckage of failed projects he had deftly pinned on others, and into the executive suite. And now he was about to reach the very top. The doors opened on the 38th floor. This was the executive wing. Mahogany panels, original art on the walls, a receptionist named Chloe who was young, efficient, and visibly nervous whenever David was in the room. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," Chloe said, her voice carefully bright. "The board is assembling in the Whitmore conference room. They're waiting for the chairperson." "Good," David smoothed his tie. "When the chairperson arrives, escort them directly to the conference room. I'll be in my office until then. I want a moment to collect my thoughts before the announcement." Chloe hesitated. "Actually, sir, the chairperson's office sent specific instructions. They asked that all executive staff be seated and waiting before they arrive. It's a protocol thing." David's jaw tightened. He didn't like being told what to do, especially not by some faceless chairperson's assistant, but he forced a smile. "Fine, protocol. I understand. I'll head to the conference room now." He walked down the hall toward the Whitmore conference room, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The door was closed. He could hear low voices inside, the board members already assembled. He paused, took a breath, and adjusted his cuffs. This was his moment. He had been waiting for it for years. He opened the door. The Whitmore conference room was the crown jewel of the Apex Delivery Tower. It occupied the entire northeast corner of the 38th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the river and the distant hills. The table was a single slab of reclaimed walnut polished to a mirror shine. 18 leather chairs surrounded it, each one occupied by a member of the board or the executive leadership team. David's eyes swept the room. Gerald Finch, the outgoing CEO, sat at the far end of the table, looking oddly serene for a man about to lose his job. The board members, a mix of industry veterans and financial experts, were arranged around him, their faces carefully neutral. And at the head of the table, the chair that was always left empty for the anonymous chairperson sat waiting. David walked to a seat near the head of the table. Not the head, that would be presumptuous, but close enough to signal his importance. He sat down and crossed his legs, his posture easy and confident. Gerald Finch caught his eye and nodded. "David, glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it, Gerald." David smiled. Big day for the company, a new chapter, new leadership, exciting times. A few of the board members exchanged glances. David didn't notice. He was too busy imagining the press release, the photograph that would appear in the business journals, the way Mia would look at him when he walked out of this room as the newly announced CEO. The minutes ticked by. 9:58, 10 o'clock, 10:03. The board members checked their watches, their phones, their folders. David remained still, his face a mask of patient confidence. At 10:07, the door to the conference room opened. Not the main door, the private door, the one that connected directly to the executive elevator and was used only by the CEO and visiting dignitaries. Every head in the room turned. A woman stepped through. She was tall, elegant, dressed in a navy suit that fit her like armor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low, sleek twist. Her makeup was minimal but precise. She moved with the quiet, unhurried confidence of someone who owned not just the building she was entering, but the ground it stood on. Behind her, a team followed, 2 associates carrying leather-bound document cases, and a sharp-eyed woman with silver-streaked hair who David didn't recognize. But it was the woman in the navy suit who held his attention. There was something familiar about her, something in the way she held herself, the angle of her jaw, the calm, steady gaze that swept across the room as she approached. And then she turned her head, and David saw her face. Sarah, his wife, the woman he had left 3 weeks ago, the woman he had called stagnant on her 40th birthday, the woman he had dismissed as a housewife with a hobby. She was walking toward the head of the table. David's blood turned to ice. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands, which had been resting confidently on the armrests of his chair, went numb. The board members rose to their feet. All of them. Gerald Finch, the independent directors, the financial experts. They stood in unison, their chairs scraping back, their faces arranged in expressions of professional deference. And as Sarah reached the head of the table, they spoke. "Good morning, Madam Chair." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Sarah didn't look at David, not yet. She placed her hands on the back of the chair, her chair, and surveyed the room. Her eyes moved from face to face, acknowledging each board member with a small nod. Then, finally, her gaze landed on him. It was only for a moment, a brief, flickering glance that lasted no more than 2 seconds. But in that glance, David saw everything. He saw the 15 years of being overlooked. He saw the late nights she had spent building an empire while he slept. He saw the promotion she had quietly approved, the raises she had signed, the career she had propped up from the shadows. He saw the woman he had called stagnant, standing at the head of a boardroom table, holding his entire future in her perfectly manicured hands. And he saw something else, too. Something that terrified him more than anger or revenge. He saw indifference. "Please," Sarah said, her voice calm and clear. "Be seated." The board sat. David remained frozen, his body refusing to obey his commands. Sarah took her seat at the head of the table. The woman with silver-streaked hair. Anya Sterling, he realized, the name surfacing from some forgotten corner of his memory, sat to her right. The associates positioned themselves against the wall. Sarah folded her hands on the table. She looked around the room once more, and then she spoke. "Thank you all for being here. I know the events of the past few weeks have been unexpected for some of you. I want to begin by clarifying a few things so that we're all operating from the same set of facts." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Fact 1. I am the sole founder and majority shareholder of Vanguard Holdings. There is no committee. There is no consortium. There is me. I built this company from a single investment 7 years ago, and I have grown it into a diversified holding corporation with assets in logistics, technology, and commercial real estate. A murmur rippled through the board. David's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Fact 2, Sarah continued. Vanguard Holdings acquired a controlling interest in Apex Delivery 3 years ago. At the time, this company was on the verge of bankruptcy. The systems were outdated. The leadership was failing. The culture was toxic. I stepped in quietly because I believed the underlying assets were strong, and the employees deserve better than to lose their jobs because of executive incompetence. She paused. Her eyes flickered just for a moment toward David. Fact 3. For the past 3 years, I have chosen to remain anonymous. I did this not out of fear, but out of a desire to observe. I wanted to see how this company would function without the distraction of my presence. I wanted to see who would step up, who would coast, and who would reveal themselves to be exactly what they appeared. She let the silence stretch. Some of you have performed admirably, others have not. And one of you, her gaze settled on David, cold and absolute, has operated with a level of arrogance and entitlement that is not only unprofessional, but actively harmful to the culture and future of this organization. David felt the room's attention shift toward him. He could feel the eyes of every board member boring into the back of his skull. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, to say something, anything that would shatter this nightmare, but his throat had closed up. His voice was gone. Sarah reached into the leather portfolio on the table before her and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She slid it across the polished walnut. It came to rest directly in front of David. A termination notice. Effective immediately, Sarah said, her voice calm and melodic, utterly without heat. Your employment with Apex Delivery is terminated. You will receive no severance. Your unvested equity is forfeit. Your access to this building is revoked. David stared at the paper. The words blurred and swam before his eyes. He couldn't breathe. You said you needed a woman who looks the part, David, Sarah continued, her voice soft and steady. Someone who can walk into a room and command attention. Someone who matches the image of a high-powered executive. I've given that a great deal of thought over the past 3 weeks. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his. I've decided that the part of CEO and of any leadership role in this company requires something more than image. It requires loyalty. It requires integrity. It requires the ability to see people for who they are, not for what they can provide. You have none of those qualities. You never did. David's mouth opened. A sound came out, something between a gasp and a whimper. Sarah, please, we can talk about this. Security will help you find your energy outside the building, Sarah said. She pressed a button on the table. The door to the conference room opened, and 2 men in dark suits stepped inside. They were not Apex Delivery employees. They were private security, hired by Vanguard Holdings, their faces impassive, their presence absolute. One of them walked to David's chair and placed a hand on his shoulder. Not rough, just firm. Inevitable. Sir, the guard said, let's go. David didn't move. He was staring at Sarah, his face a mask of devastation. You can't do this. I built this company. I gave 15 years to this place. You can't just... I can, Sarah said. I did, and you gave 15 years to a company that you believed was yours. But it was never yours, David. It was mine. Every promotion, every raise, every bonus you bragged about, all of it came from me. I signed the papers myself, late at night while you slept. I protected your ego because I believed you loved me. I believed that if I just stayed quiet, stayed small, you would eventually turn around and see me. She shook her head slowly, but you never did. And then you walked into our home on my 40th birthday and told me I wasn't enough. You called me stagnant. You told me you needed a woman who looked the part. So I decided to show you exactly what the part looks like. The guard's hand tightened on David's shoulder. He rose from his chair like a man in a dream, his legs unsteady, his face gray. The guard guided him toward the door. At the threshold, Sarah spoke one more time. David? He turned. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life collapse in the space of 10 minutes. The woman you brought to the lobby, Sarah said. Mia, she's still waiting. I saw her when I came in. I suggest you tell her the news yourself. I suspect she won't take it well." David's face crumpled. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The guard pulled him gently through the doorway, and the door closed behind him with a soft final click. The boardroom was silent. Sarah looked around the table. The board members were staring at her with a mixture of awe and carefully concealed terror. Gerald Finch was smiling, a small, knowing smile, the smile of a man who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Now," Sarah said, folding her hands on the table, "let's discuss the future of this company. I have some ideas about leadership, about culture, about the kind of organization I want Apex Delivery to become." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. "Any questions?" No one spoke. "Good," Sarah said. "Then let's begin." In the lobby, 38 floors below, Mia was still waiting. She had positioned herself near the waterfall feature, her phone in hand, her posture arranged for maximum visibility. She was wearing a white sheath dress that was just a shade too short for a corporate environment, and a pair of red-soled heels that announced her presence with every step. She had already taken several selfies, angling her phone to capture the waterfall and the marble and the general aura of wealth. She was ready for her close-up. When the elevator doors opened, she looked up, her smile already in place. But it wasn't David who emerged. It was two security guards flanking a man who looked like he had aged 10 years in the space of a single morning. His Tom Ford suit was rumpled. His face was gray. His eyes were red. "Mia," David said. His voice cracked. She stared at him. Her smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating assessment. She looked from his face to the security guards to the closed elevator doors behind him. "What happened?" she asked. Her voice was flat. "The chairperson," David said. "It was Sarah. She owns the company. She owns everything. She fired me. Mia held up a hand. She didn't let him finish. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes sweeping over his disheveled suit, his broken expression, his complete and total collapse. Then she turned and walked away. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, a sound David had once found sexy and now found unbearable. She didn't look back. She pushed through the revolving doors and disappeared into the city, already pulling out her phone, already composing the post that would erase him from her carefully curated life. David stood in the lobby, alone, the waterfall burbling behind him. The security guards waited patiently, their hands clasped behind their backs. Employees walked past, their eyes carefully averted. He was a ghost in the building he had once believed he ruled. The guard who had escorted him out touched his elbow. "Sir, we need to escort you off the property." David nodded. He couldn't speak. He let them guide him toward the revolving doors, through them, and out onto the sidewalk. The autumn air hit his face, cold and sharp. The city hummed around him, indifferent to his ruin. He looked up at the tower, 38 stories of glass and steel. Somewhere up there, on the top floor, Sarah was sitting at the head of the boardroom table, discussing the future of the company she had built, company that had always been hers. He had called her stagnant. He had dismissed her as a housewife with a hobby. He had walked away from 15 years of marriage for a woman who had just left him without a backward glance. He had nothing. He stood on the sidewalk, his Tom Ford suit rumpled, his eyes wet, and watched the tower that had once been his kingdom. It wasn't his. It had never been his. It had always been hers, and he had thrown her away.